financial crisis recovery.
Foreclosure, short sales, bankruptcy, credit card debt, job loss, depreciating home values, money management. Peace of mind when it comes to your finances seems completely out of reach under current conditions, but there is a way to achieve it. For the next 60 minutes, you're going to find out how to cover your assets. Cover your assets.
Welcome back to Cover Your Assets. We are talking today with Curtis Zahn from Champion Law about student loan debt and how to contend with it, how to put yourself in a position where you're in a reasonable payment plan. And if you're dealing with, collectors who are pressing you and putting a lot of pressure on you, we're going to talk about how you can literally hire Curtis, bring him on your team, and use his services to be able to push those people back. Use the law for your best interest, and that is precisely what Curtis does. Curtis has been on both sides of the table. He's actually pursued consumers when they don't make their payments with student loan debt. He now, of course, knows both sides of that and where the shortcomings are of the collections agent and how often they will break the law and how that can be used to your best advantage. So we were talking when we left the break. We were talking about how a person puts forth a payment plan. And Curtis, you and I at the break were talking just a little bit about that. Why don't you expand upon how people don't put the actual expenses that they have, and then they wind up with a payment plan that may not be affordable because they're simply not considering all of the expenses that are used and allowable within that formula?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, people often forget things when they're making their budget. And so a good place to start, I would say, whenever a consumer is looking to make up their budget, is to go to the IRS has collection standards for when they're collecting tax debt. And when you go there, they have a listing of all the types of expenses that one might have. And they have standards both at a national level and a local level. I mean, literally down to the county that you live in. So they'll allow, for example, $301 for food, and they have housekeeping supplies.
And is that per person? $301?
Exactly. Well, for two people, you get $537. So not double. I mean, they recognize the fact that in a household of two, it's not necessarily double one person.
Right.
That's the thing is, if you have a house of four persons, you get four people, you get $765 allowance for that. And they go through, food, housekeeping supplies, apparel and services, personal care products and services, and kind of a miscellaneous category. And then obviously housing. I mean, you literally can go in there and say, okay, if you are in Becker County for a family of two, they'll allow $1,439. If you're in Hennepin County, that allowance is $2,013.
So what if I don't have expenses? What if I have rent and my rent is $1,200? Does that mean that they give me that regardless, or what's the deal?
No. I mean, I think this is a good guideline for you. If you're under that amount, I think your expenses are your expenses, and you have to be honest about them. You can't say your rent's $1,400 if it's really $1,200.
Right.
But if you are saying that your rent is $1,400 and the collector is saying, oh, that's too much, we're only allow you $800, I think you got a really strong argument that, hey, if the IRS, when they're collecting tax debt, says this is reasonable, I don't know how you can say it's not reasonable.
And not only that, Curtis, one of the other things that I think is important to know is that a lot of these standards may not be actual for where you live. And one of the things you bring up is the food allowance. Well, look, with Curtis on your side, you could certainly bring an argument because I know, because I'm in the financial planning business, that food costs, grocery bills have gone up 29% over the last 12 months. Well, my goodness, you can bring an argument that, look, I have special food issues. I've got, food allergies. I've got a kosher diet, what have you. And these are all things that are arguments that could justifiably, and they may really will be the case. And so it's not just these guidelines. It's also what's reasonable. And you can assist a person in actually, using that as an argument as to why those expenses might be more than even the standard guidelines. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. There are also food standards out there that kind of can be adjusted for those types of things. And I think the key is making a reasonable argument to debt collectors and being able to justify it. And if you, like, for example, if you have dietary restrictions, you have to have a gluten-free diet, I think you can make a strong argument that those expenses are going to be higher than the national, the average standards for, an average family. And then, I think that's the key is justification.
And all of these things can give you the ability to step back, put you in an affordable payment plan where you can begin to gather yourself up financially. And then once you've done that and you've built somewhat of an emergency fund where you've got some fallback money so the whole world isn't going to go wrong tomorrow if the engine blows up on your car and you're screwed. And I see that with people. They don't have any flexibility in their budget. This gives you a payment plan that enables you to be able to regroup, come back, and then, of course, begin to accelerate and pay down that debt. Some of the specific things that intrigued me about your practice right from the very beginning were some of the wins that you had on your side where collectors had come after consumers and you were actually really able to turn the tables on the collectors on behalf of your client. Could you give me a little insight into some of those and our listeners so that they can see what actually could be done in some cases?
Well, and the first thing I'll tell you is most settlement agreements, if you settle a case as opposed to having it litigated in court, the agreements are always the collectors always want them confidential, and there's no admission of liability. So I can't really talk about any specifics. But generally speaking, when someone comes to you, it really depends on the type of debt.
Well, how come they don't want anybody to know that, Chris? I mean, I don't understand.
I don't understand it either.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the type of debt that you have. And this is, again, the key of knowing that. So if you have, for example, student loan debt, there's a little bit of flexibility there, but you're not going to get a lot of flexibility. But if you have a debt buyer, and I think this is where there's a lot more flexibility, so someone who purchased the debt after it defaulted, so a credit card debt, old credit card debt, that person purchased it for maybe 5 cents on the dollar, 10 cents on the dollar. So it's not uncommon for them when I'm approaching them about settling this case to offer up to either greatly reduce that debt or to completely eliminate it as part of the settlement, which can give clients a great amount of relief and more maybe than they might have been able to recover just under the FDCPA itself.
I see people who are told that that their debt has been purchased by a debt collection agency, student loan debt specifically, and the client is told that yes, we collect it, we now own the debt, and yes, we can pursue you, and yes, we can increase the interest rate, but we still have the protection afforded us of a student loan debt whereby it's non-dischargeable. So there's not a doggone thing you can do, Mr. Consumer, and we can pretty much charge you anything we want. Now, is that really even true?
Again, it depends. I mean, if you're talking about federally guaranteed student loans, a collection agency is never going to own those. Not going to happen. But if you're talking about private loans, that's obviously possible, and that's, again, the big difference between those two, and that's why it's important to know those differences.
Why is it that private loans are non-dischargeable? I just don't get that.
That was a couple, there were a few years ago. It used to only be federally guaranteed student loans that were non-dischargeable, but you know how Congress works with lobbyists in the financial industry, how much power they have. And so they came in there, and it's really unfortunate. I think they're looking at that, too, as a problem, because it makes sense to have federally guaranteed student loans be non-dischargeable because if you look at all these programs and the options available to people and the subsidies you get from the government and the fact that they'll discharge any remaining debt, for example, like an IBR payment after 25 years you haven't paid it all off, those are great. So it makes sense to have those non-dischargeable. Private loans, though, they're not giving you all these beneficial repayment options. You can't, they don't get canceled when you die, things of that sort. So I think the justification for having those be non-dischargeable, frankly, just isn't there.
Well, you get none of the good and all of the bad.
Precisely.
You really do. You have no guarantee on interest rate, and look, when interest rates on student loan debt are exceeding 20%, it's a little like the arm breaker down on the corner, and you've got a very aggressive collector who can potentially jack that interest rate all the way up to 20+%. Yet you can't walk away from it. There's no way to get away. And they can literally put you in an enormously compromised position. But even with all of that said, these debt collectors are also breaking the laws. And that relates to credit card debt or any other type of debt. And that is where you can really get someone like yourself on your side and use that against you. I mean, that's some of the things. What are some of the violations? I don't need you to tell me specifically, what cases you've won and the specifics of that case. But just in general terms, what are some of the things that you've been able to do that are wins for you and your clients that are not relatable to any person or any company? Just give me an idea of what we're talking about here.
Well, I mean, I think when you talk about what type of violations we're talking about, the real common one is, you'll get a call. The first call you get is, you have to make this payment. You owe a student loan debt. You have to make this payment. They haven't talked about your budget. They'll just say you have to make this payment, which is probably what the minimum payment they need to receive to get their commission. And if you don't, we're going to garnish your wages. And I think you experienced this too. If I don't get a payment by tonight, we're going to start garnishing your wages. The fact is that student loan companies can garnish your wages without a court order. but there's a whole process to go through, and there are restrictions and limitations, and really they can only do it for non-paying borrowers. So what you see is they throw this threat out there that's not really viable at the time they're making it to force a payment that you can't afford.
Which is a threat that should not be made. Let's be specific.
Absolutely. It
should not be made, and that in and of itself is a violation of the Collection Act, right?
Yeah, and what they'll do is they'll threaten that you're going to garnish your wages for some amount that exceeds what they can legally do to make their other unreasonable payment seem more reasonable. You know, it's like any kind of sale. You know, if they double the prices and then cut them in a third, it seems like a sale, but it's really not. And I think that what you have some debt collectors when it comes to student loans doing that. And I think just dropping back to your other comment about student loans being 20%. Again, the federally guaranteed student loans are never going to be that way, and that's the difference between private and federal guaranteed. And so that's that's
which
why
is the whole danger and the point that I was trying to make about consolidating loans. I mean, you can go from something that is utterly reasonable to something that is beyond comprehension unreasonable, and not even realize what you're doing. So it's just absolutely vital when you talk about the collectors who are out there. They're so frequently talking about, well, we're going to garnish your wages. I mean, I have clients who come to me and they're literally ready to be institutionalized after 30 days of this because the debt collectors are telling them that they're going to garnish their wages, they're going to levy their bank accounts, they're going to lien their property, and the reality is they've not even received a legal complaint that they have an opportunity to answer, which of course means a legal answer to the complaint. So how in the world can you tell me that you're going to garnish my wages when you've not even placed a judgment and proven that you actually have a valid lawsuit against me, right?
Yeah, that's the common threat. I mean, the threat to garnishment happens all the time. People without judgments with students.
And they're not able to do it. That's the main point, right? I mean, they're not able to say this without doing this, right?
At that point in time, yeah. And it depends on how it's said, too. And I think that's always the key. And that's why it's really important to talk to, I think, an attorney about this. And, if you can record it or you have anything else, is to, how it's being said is kind of the key to see if there's a violation or not a violation.
Sounds like recording the conversation is probably one of the most valuable things that you can possibly do.
And Minnesota is a one-party state, so only one party has to have consent to record the calls.
Which means that if we're on a phone call and I'm recording the call, I don't need to tell you that it's being recorded. As long as I know it's being recorded, that is valid.
Well, you've consented to it.
There you go. There you go. So isn't that something? Well, listen, we have been so fortunate here to talk to Curtis Zahn from Champion Law about student loan debt and, in fact, all debt and the unfair practices that are engaged in by collection agents and how somebody like Curtis can use that to your best interest. Again, Curtis will take a look at your case. He's willing to look at your case, and he attempts to get his compensation from the creditors who are pursuing you and try to push them back and work in your favor. So in some cases, you probably may not even have to pay Curtis a retainer, which is many people are concerned, my goodness gracious, I can't afford my bills. How am I going to afford an attorney? And you're a real answer to that. Tell us a little more, just as a parting gift here, tell us a little more about your services, Curtis, and how people can get a hold of you in the future to be able to work on their behalf.
The first thing I would say is a great resource and to kind of go over a lot of other violations is www.consumerlawchampion.com. And from that website, you're going to list a lot of other types of violations, talking to your friends and coworkers about your debt, whatnot. And then I have a case evaluation form people can fill out and email to me with some basic information. You can also call us at 612-LAW-CHAMP. We're happy to talk to you.
612-LAW-CHAMP.
LAW-CHAMP. I know there's one extra number in there, but it's easier to remember LAW-CHAMP than LAW-CHAM. And so give us a call. We'll talk about your case, and I can go over what's happened and see if there are any potential violations. And if they're not violations, we can still talk about options that you have to help yourself.
I just find this to be fascinating. It's great information, and we've always felt like we're at a loss. We now have somebody on our side to help us with this. Go to CYA21.com to get Curtis's information. Also, while you're there, download the Financial Crisis Bible, and then also take a look at the UltimateFinancialStrength.com, which is an entire DVD series that we used to sell for over $1,000 that we're making available to our listeners for $200. See you next week at Cover Your Assets. Thank you so much for listening.